Okay, so I have this virtual machine created. It's called Ubuntu Desktop, and the first thing is I want to go through some of the settings to see if there's any adjustment that needs to be made on this virtual machine before I actually start installing the operating system. So if I click on settings, which is this button that looks like a little gear, it takes me to the settings of that particular virtual machine. Okay, so here's my virtual machine, and I want to go through some of the settings here just to make sure that I have enough memory and CPU and whatever else settings I need in terms of my hardware that I want to assign to this virtual machine. So the first thing in the general tab will be the name of the computer. How did it get this name? I actually choose this name when I was creating the virtual machine. You have that option. You have to name the give it a name, right? So I just use a friendly name. I said Ubuntu. I call it Ubuntu Desktop. You can call it whatever you want to, but keep it simple so that you're not complicating things. If you go to the advanced tab here, this just tells you where the snapshots for this virtual machine will be stored. Here you can choose if you have an external drive or you have a secondary drive and you don't want your snapshots to be stored in this particular location. You can go ahead and change this. For our purpose, for our lab purpose, I don't need to change that. I'm going to leave it as the basic. Now, this shared clipboard here, where it says shared clipboard and drag and drop, you will notice that it says bidirectional. But this is a setting that I actually had to choose after creating this virtual machine. By default, it is disabled. It is disabled for both of them. Okay? What you want to do is, it's always a good idea to enable the shared clipboard. Why do you want to enable it? Because it allows easy drag and drop access between your host machine and your virtual machine. So literally you can actually drag a file from your local desktop onto or inside of the virtual machine, and vice versa, meaning that you can do the same. Just drag a file or copy a file from inside of the virtual machine to your host desktop or anywhere on your host operating system, right? By default it's disabled. I highly encourage changing it to bidirectional, meaning both ways, right? Description, there's nothing there. It's blank. You can put a description if you need to. And this encryption, you don't need to do that. Okay. Going on to the next tab where it says system. Here is the amount of memory that you would have assigned when creating the virtual machine. Of course, here you can use this slider. If your computer allows or has more memory that it can that you can adjust for this virtual machine, you can do so by either typing the number here at the end, or you can use this slider just to adjust it. I've given mine 3 gigs, and that is perfect for this virtual machine. I don't need any more than that. If at some point I find that the operating system is lagging and or applications are not running properly, or my memory usage is going high inside of the virtual machine, this is where I can come and make the adjustment very easily. The boot order, this is what I was telling you about after the power on self-test on a computer. The computer then looks to your boot order in the BIOS and says, well, okay, the first boot device to look to, or the first device to look for a boot file, is the optical drive. So this is an emulation of an optical drive or a CD drive. The next boot order, so if there's nothing available in the optical drive, then look for the bootloader on the hard drive, or look for the operating system on a hard drive. Okay. Now, in order for you to install the Ubuntu operating system or any operating system that you download, you would have download the ISO file. Okay, the ISO file is basically the file that you go and download for whichever distribution that you choose. In our case, we're using Ubuntu. It will download the entire distribution and put it in one single ISO file. So you need to tell the optical, you need to place that ISO file inside or link it to the optical drive, and I'll show you where you can go and link it. Currently it's not linked. Okay, currently this optical drive, it's actually empty, it's not linked. But there's another place or another section that we need to go and link it. In the processor here, by default, when creating the virtual machine, the software, the VirtualBox manager assigns only one CPU. It assigns a single CPU to the virtual machine. I have actually increased it by one because I find that one CPU, giving it just one core, one CPU, can slow the operating system down. It can slow things out, especially when you have a fancy graphical user interface. It takes up a lot more CPU. If you have a computer that allows multiple CPUs, or you can assign more than one CPU to the operating system, to this particular desktop operating system, I highly encourage that. So if you have an i5 or an i7 CPU, then it should not be a problem. Your system will be okay to assign 2 CPUs to it. When we come to the Server edition, we're just going to only use one, because the Server will take up a lot of a lot less CPU power than is required for the desktop operating system that's running the graphical user interface. As for acceleration, you can just leave that check mark in there where it says hardware virtualization, enable nested paging. So don't change anything there, just leave it as the default. The only thing that I will advise changing is add another CPU, another virtual CPU, if your computer allows it only. All right? In regards to the display settings, this here depends on how much memory is on your video card. So if you have a video card that has a lot of memory, you can choose to do the maximum amount of memory, or you can choose to use the default, which is 16 meg. So on my computer, I'm gonna actually move the slide over to 128 and give it full amount of video memory. What this means that the graphical interface is just gonna work much smoother, right? Because you're giving it more of your graphic card memory, or more memory from the actual video graphics card. You don't have to change the settings. I'm just gonna change it because I just find that it works a little bit better, right? Remote display, you don't need to worry about, or recording. The next tab that is important is the storage. Okay, we click on storage, and here is where we see our 2 drives, the one optical drive, and you can actually see that it says empty. And then the next one is the disk, the virtual disk that was assigned to this virtual machine at the time of creation. So during creating this virtual machine, and you will be familiar with the same thing whether you have used VirtualBox before or the VMware Workstation, it is pretty much the same thing, very, very similar. So I have a virtual disk that is registered to this virtual machine, or that was assigned to this virtual machine at the time of creating it, and I'm using about 20 gigs of space only. I don't need more than that for a lab environment. The important thing is that we need to attach our ISO file that we downloaded, our distribution ISO file that we downloaded from whichever website we went to, whether it was DistroWatch, or you went to Ubuntu.com and you download the file. Here's where you attach it, to tell the operating system to boot or to go to the optical drive in order to start the boot process or start the installation process. So how do you attach that? Now, if you downloaded a file, most likely it would have downloaded to your downloads folder. Whether you have it in your downloads folder, you have it in your desktop, or whichever folder or location on your hard drive you choose to put that file, that's totally up to you. You just have to remember the path where that file is located. So on my computer, I know exactly where it's located. So I'm just gonna go and browse, and I'll say choose this file, and all my ISO files are actually located in a single location. So I'm just going to go and look for the one that I want, right? And the one that I want to install is this one here, Ubuntu 21.04. That was the latest version that was available. And I click on open. Okay, so now it's attached. So it no longer says empty, right? So we can see that the file is now attached there. Okay, so what will happen if you go back to and look at the actual boot on the system motherboard, where it's saying now the boot order should be the optical drive. Now we have inserted or attached our boot file in this optical drive. So the computer will now say, okay, I will first look for the boot device on the optical drive, and if one is present, I'm going to start booting. If it's not present, then I'll go to the second option, which is the virtual hard drive. Okay. The next thing is I'm not going to worry about audio, because I really don't care about audio on the virtual machine that I'm going to be installing. But what I care about is the network. I need to assign a network adapter. Now I'm going to spend a little bit more time explaining to you the differences between these network adapter. I think I briefly mentioned it in our previous class. For the purpose of this class, I actually want to choose host only, NAT. I'm going to leave it as NAT. What NAT means is this virtual machine will use your existing network card that is connected, your physical network card, to get access to the outside world. Outside world meaning that you can get access to the internet. And I want this computer to actually have access to the internet, because that's how we need that connection in order to go and get software and do updates and stuff like that on this computer, in the virtual machine, once it has been installed and up and running, right? So I'm going to leave it as NAT, because NAT just means that it will use the shared network card, the physical card that's on the computer. It will share it with the host operating system, or the host operating system will be sharing the same network card between the virtual machine and itself. So by default it is set to NAT. Leave it as NAT. Okay. The rest of the stuff here I'm not too concerned about, like user interface, etc. Once I set my network, I click on OK. All right. So now if I power on this virtual machine, what will happen is, the first thing that will happen is that it will go to the optical drive to start booting the ISO file that I just attached to the optical drive.